What is going on, my homies? So I got some cool news. I had an epic day yesterday. I caught 24.55 pounds, almost 25 pounds on Guntersville. Pretty stoked. I think it is my biggest bag for this year, and I wanted to share it with you, but in a little different way. We're gonna do something kind of totally different. You guys always are asking about like details and stuff, so I'm gonna spill the details because I think it illustrates something that's hugely important, and it's something that I'm always learning, especially coming from Florida, where basically you can fish 365 days of the year with like 4 rods. And that's the concept of adjustment, making little lure tweaks, little presentation tweaks that completely change the game for pressured fish that have seen all these different lures, just doing something slightly different with the same old stuff, with crankbaits, with flukes, with worms. I'm gonna walk you through kind of like a recap. I have all the fish catches, gonna show you exactly how things went down, but I'm gonna walk you through exactly what I was thinking and exactly what happened that day to maybe give you guys some ideas of how you can adjust some of your presentations, some of your lures to get more bites this summer, especially when it comes to offshore fishing. So hit that like and subscribe button for me. Let's get to the juice. So first things first, I went deep in the morning, and ironically I went too deep. So I ended up catching some spots, and actually one pretty decent one, like a 3+ pound spot, doing the old dangle minnow, dude. Caught quite a few, like maybe like 4 or 5 off of one spot in approximately like 20 to 25 feet of water. And what I pulled away from that immediately is I'm too deep. I love catching spots, but in the end, if you want to play ball in Guntersville, you need to catch largemouth. And the fact that I was catching spots in that sort of depth range indicated to me that I needed to make the first adjustment of the day, and that's I needed to fish shallower. So by about midday, I was grinding a little bit. So what I wanted to do is power fish a little, cover some water, and see if I could get some bites. We're focusing on hard spots, you know, road beds, shell bars, anywhere there's maybe like rock or a transition between grass and like that hard edge that's on the other side. I love fishing a crankbait, dude. I caught that 49 pounds, multiple 40-pound bags, throwing a crankbait. But I pulled out something a little different. We've talked about it in our crankbait walkthrough. This is a 6 cents. I think it's the Crush. Don't hold me to it. It's the C15. I'll put links to all this stuff at Tackle Warehouse. But I've been playing with crankbait colors. Everybody throws like sexy shad. Everybody throws, you know, shad, green gizzard shad now. Everybody throws that. And what I've noticed, and there's 2 factors to this. You'll notice this is kind of like a chartreuse yellow. So one, we have slightly stained water. You know, obviously you want a brighter crankbait. And 2, there's these like yellow bass in here. Basically, it's a version of white bass, and they basically look yellow. And it's actually going to lead to something later on that's super cool with a fluke. But basically, I pulled out the crankbait, and one thing that I do hyper different than 90% of other people is I try to break my crankbait and break my line. You can kind of see the bill. The bill's an indicator of what I did. So I make bomb casts with this thing on hard spots or expansive hard spot areas to cover water, and I grind it, bro. Like, just really crank that reel down. I'm running a 621. This is a Shimano SLX, little faster cranking reel than most people, but what's nice is it's the DC, so I can make bomb casts, and it has that controlled braking system. Got that on a 7/8 monster bass cranking rod. What's cool with this C15 too, C15, you think it runs 15 foot deep? No, it runs like 18 to 20. It really gets down there when you grind it. It's also an extremely aggressive crankbait. It has a very pronounced like side-to-side vibration and wobble. It's more aggressive than most sort of like 6XD style crankbaits in that category. It really feels a lot more like a 10XD. It's got a lot of drag, a lot of freaking grind to it, and I think that aggressiveness leads to one of 2 things: the fish getting out of the way and moving, or it causes them to bite. So that's kind of what I did. We caught a 5.5 or almost 5.5 pounds, just a great big one. But after we caught that fish, things kind of dried up. I think I caught a few other little ones and some white bass in that, but I really couldn't get them to continue. And I think part of that was the water was pretty calm. There wasn't that much chop. There's a little bit of cloud cover, but it wasn't the prime sort of crankbait day where you got a lot of current and a lot of chop. So we had to make another adjustment after that. So it's later in the day. and the conditions kind of started setting up perfect. We got some clouds, we had some pretty slick water, but what I find is later in the day, these fish tend to suspend a lot more, and they really react to something that's above their heads. So I got out my hover strolling and mid strolling box, dude, and this has all my little dangle minnows, my hover rig terminal, and that. And what I wanted to do, and like I said, this isn't an easy presentation, what I wanted to do is give them a shad-like or a baitfish-like presentation, but above their heads. So I got out the Gambler hover hook, this guy right here. It's basically just a little straight shank hook. It has a weight kind of embedded on it, and what you do with that is you got to sink it down. It takes a minute, especially when you're fishing 12, 15, 18 feet of water. Put it on a little spinning rod. Actually got the setup right here. Monster bass, 7-foot medium light lunker stick, braid, 12-pound cast braid to 8-pound fluorocarbon leader. The leader's really important. You want to go 8 or 6, in my opinion, on this specific presentation, because it provides less resistance for that bait to get down. You want that thing to get down as fast as possible, but you don't want it to like sink like a bullet. So you can't use a heavy weight, but if you decrease your line size, it reduces the amount of friction and the amount of resistance against that line, and it gets down a little faster. This is a Gambler Super Stud, and you're gonna notice something right off the bat. You're like, balls, that thing's kind of yellow looking. Yes. So I have some flukes that I stash away. The Super Stud's a little bit softer, but basically these are old, like I've had them for like 3 years, Gambler Super Studs. And what happens is they're in white lightning, they turn kind of yellow. And some guys might be like, yeah, that's terrible. And I'm like, no, au contraire, my friend, that's awesome. So I've noticed out here on Guntersville, they like this yellowy color. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's because of the yellow bass or what, but there's something to it. The other thing is a lot of guys will throw like super downsized bait, a little 3.5 spunk shad, things along those lines on this hover rig. I like, especially this time of year in summer, something a little bit bigger. So that fluke's about 4.5, 5 inches. It's a classic bait. You always catch fish on a fluke no matter what body of water you're on. It allows me to cast that hover rig better, and it just gives the presentation a little more bulk. So yellow fluke, a little more bulky hover rig. It's still a chore to sink it down. And what we did is we got on some of these small pods of fish. Once again, on hard spots, we'd make a long cast, allow that bait to sink down, and basically try to draw those fish off the bottom and draw them up. Instead of going straight to the bottom to try to like get right in their face, we got kind of above their foreheads. And here's the trick. I'm talking like 2 to 4, 2 to 5 foot above their foreheads in like 12 to 15 feet of water. So quite a ways up. And what I've found, and once again, 100% thanks to FFS, and it's not so much catching them on it, it's understanding how they behave and how they react to a lure and presentation. What I noticed is you needed to keep a good space above them in order to get them to react to it. They would not react to that bait right in their face. And we ended up catching like a great big 4-pounder.
But it's like one of those super fatty batty bass, dude.
What I tried to do is really expand that into a pattern. And I really think with that cloud cover and sort of the slick, sort of slack water, I tried to parlay that into a more extenuating pattern. So I started jumping around some pods of fish and looking for pods of fish. I would basically idle grass lines. I would idle the main river. I'd idle little secondary channels, you know, any of these sort of like structure oriented sort of intersections, you know, grass to hard spot to soft, like soft bottom. Those channels where they swing in and they hit, so you get that juncture, you get an underwater point. And I ended up finding another group of fish, and this was the absolute juice. So we made a cast with the hover rig, and what I thought was like 5 or 6 fish ended up being like 20 of them, dude. And they were set up on the transition, so on a drop right next to the grass going to a hard spot. So you had the drop, little flat spot, and then the grass would come up. And it seemed like that transition right on that edge coming up to that hard spot was the absolute juice. So we started making some more casts, and I ended up catching, I think it was like a 4 or a 5-pounder, dude. Just an absolute stud. And then it was balls to the wall, bro. Like, we put together that 24.5-pound limit right there. But we had to make yet another adjustment. So we went from the crankbait to the hover rig to a bigger bait on the hover rig. So we caught, I think we caught a couple doing our traditional kind of hover rig approach. You make that long cast, you slow sink it down, and really you got to be more subtle than anything. You're making very soft rod pops to suspend and keep that bait kind of in place and gradually draw it to you. You don't want to jerk it around. You're not fishing it like a fluke where you're darting back and forth. You're making very soft rod pops, and the tail and that bait will just roll ever so slightly and maybe slightly dart, but you don't want to jerk it too hard, otherwise it pops up in the water column. So what we did is I used something that I call a hair jig retrieve.
Oh, come on. That's the limit, and that'll put us well over 20. Do you see what I did where I basically like reeled that hover rig real fast? It's what I like to call hair jigging a hover rig. Stay out of there. And this one ain't nearly as big. We're gonna boat flip her. But it really triggers them when you got them like following like super hard and you can't get them to close. It's a great, God, he got it. It's a great way to basically make them bite the bait.
I told you this video was about adjustments, and the entire day was an adjustment. Every moment of the day, we were adjusting and changing how we were doing things, what we were doing, and how we were presenting the bait. So this pot of fish stopped responding to my hover rig. I kept doing that little quick retrieve, that 2 quick reels, and they just weren't closing. And one thing I find is everything has diminishing returns. You'll throw a bait, you'll catch 4, you'll catch 2, you'll catch 20 sometimes, all depending on the behavior, the mood of the fish and that. But at some point, all good things must come to an end, right? And definitely this came to an end. And one tip I'll give you is don't keep beating a dead horse, because what happens is these fish sort of get complacent and you can't make another adjustment to keep them going and keep them triggered. So you have to know when to throw in the towel and say, I need to change what I'm doing. So after about maybe 10 to 15 more casts with that hover rig, I'm like, this isn't working. I'm gonna screw this pot up. There's more fish down there to be caught, but I need to figure out a different way to close the deal. So what I like to do, a lot of guys throw a Texas red worm, a jig, things along those lines for bottom dragging. I like being a little more subtle. I picked up a Neko rig. This is the Grande Bass. I think it's like the 6-inch worm. It's the airtail. So basically it has this big old kind of like bubble tail on it. It's a classic finesse straight tail worm, but it has that bubble tail. It's hollow, and basically it's an air pocket. So it causes the bait, when you're fishing it, to float up. So you have your weight on the Neko rig right there, your wacky rig hook right there. I put a little band on it just like this so I can use worms more and they last longer. But this tail will float up and you just shake it along the bottom like a wacky rig. So I picked that guy up. It's in a plum kind of red bug. For some reason on the TVA, this color is absolutely killer. It's kind of like a transparent June bug, got some turquoise fleck in there, but it's an absolutely killer color. I have an 1/8 ounce. I don't use tungsten with this guy. I just use a little lead. I think that Demiki makes that one. It's just a little lead kind of ball weight. What I like about this versus just a traditional nail weight is that ball almost acts like a shaky head, and I'll get bottom transmission. So I can feel the bumps of the shell, the bumps of, rock off a road bed. I can get a little bit of bottom transition to understand where my bait's at, and I would drag it up that transition, and dude, my bites would come. I'd get over that transition and just shake it, fishing very slow, right there, right as it got onto that flat part, and bruh, we caught a couple dogs. Like, we caught that 610, we caught another great big one, and it was all about just kind of slow shaking it. The other thing too is I was fishing around grass, and I know a lot of guys get weird with an open hook. What I find with this Neko rig, that's a little Aaron Martin's, it's like the drop shot or the G Finesse hook. I find with that little kind of circle style hook on a Neko rig, yes, you'll get hooked in grass sometimes, but overall, I can slide through grass, or if I get a little grass on it, I can pop it. As long as the grass is semi-sparse, I can pop it and that grass comes off. That Neko rig was the closer, dude. Caught our biggest fish of the day, kind of reinforced our limit and put us over 24 pounds, nearly 25 pounds, 24.55, dude. Basically all day today. And I got to thank my buddy Jacob Wall a lot. You know, I've been on the boat with him multiple times. He fishes the MLF, the BPT. He's so malleable, which means he's so bendable. Like he really changes, and he doesn't change the world. He just changes and it makes these little adjustments all throughout the day. Every time, like I want to say, you know, I don't want to retie a bait. I don't want to do this different. I want to catch him in this certain way. That's when Jacob would make that change. And I really think that's what identifies someone who's super successful when it comes to tournament fishing and that versus, you know, guys like me who don't fish tournaments and they're a little more stubborn and they won't make little adjustments or be willing to try to make little adjustments. That's the biggest step, is being willing to try to get outside of your normal kind of range, do something a little different, take that 2 minutes to retie something and do it slightly different with the chance of it failing, but at the same time with the chance of it absolutely improving your catch rate and busting you a giant bag. And for once, I actually adjusted. So thank you, Jacob. You know, whether you're tournament fishing, whether you're weekend fishing, always be willing to take the 2 or 3 minutes to make a change, especially if you feel it in your gut and you're like, bro, I need to do something slightly different. Take that minute, dude. Yeah, the worst that can happen is that it doesn't work and you go back to what you were doing and you grind on through. But that was really the lesson for me, and it's something that I need to do more out here with the amount of pressure that Guntersville gets, the amount of baits these fish see. Slight adjustments to retrieves, to how you're fishing a bait, and then to the bait itself. You know, little tweaks to your presentation, going from grinding a crankbait to throwing a hover rig, adjusting as the day goes by. It really panned out, dude, and it's something that I need to make sure that I'm doing every single day that I'm on the water. Hope you guys enjoyed this. A little different kind of video. I really wanted to get into those real deep details of exactly how things went down, because I think it'll help you. I know it helps me reflecting on this and figuring out exactly what the recipe was that went into, like I said, I think it's one of my biggest bags this year. I'll put links to all the stuff that we talked about down in the description box if you want to check any of it out. But if you guys got any comments or stories of how you made adjustments during tournaments, during a day of fishing, to sort of get a completely different outcome than if you would have stuck being stubborn, grinding, doing the exact same thing all day, drop it down in the comments. I want to hear your stories because we all draw things from each other. We'll see you next time though, out on the water talking fishing, because I want to go fishing. Later, boys.